Rhodesia at 300 miles an hour, 150 feet above the ground. An RAF Hercules skims the treetops. The supply missions have been a triumph for the RAF. But the question now is whether the rest of the tiny monitoring force can do as well. Can they ensure the free and fair elections that the radio promises the people of Zimbabwe? We did not visit the areas influenced by Joshua Nkomo and his Zipra army, and where the ceasefire arrangements seem to be working reasonably well. Instead, we concentrated on the much larger Shona tribal area, where Robert Mugabe's ZANU-PF and Bishop Abel Muzorewa's UANC are fighting a savage electoral battle. Outwardly, Bishop Muzorewa is conducting a Western-style campaign, arriving at a string of remote airstrips in a plane loaned by a South African millionaire. As well as South African money, Muzorewa carries with him the hopes of most whites and many moderate blacks, who see the tiny campaigner as their last champion against the terrorist armies of the Patriotic Front. This almost desperate desire to see the bishop win leads to some interesting variants on the democratic process. For instance, this apparently ordinary meeting in a farming community called the Burma Valley, where the bishop addresses about 2,000 African workers, virtually the entire electorate. Watching from the sidelines, a local farmer's wife, who told me why many of the Africans have come.
They are all our labourers in the Burma Valley, for all the farmers.
Right, so you've brought them down here, in fact, haven't you?
Yes, we brought them in tractors and trucks and trailers and everything we got to transport them to here.
Why did you do that?
Well, because we think we see a future, and if Bishop comes in again, that's what we want, and we want him to listen to him, and that's all the whole reason.
So you're obviously encouraging all the labourers
yes.
who work for you to vote for the bishop and to come to these meetings?
Oh, yes, that's right, yes.
He's, as far as the whites are concerned, he's a bit of a last hope, really, isn't he?
Yes, he is definitely our last hope. Otherwise, I can see no future for us.
But the grim truth that Muzorewa's supporters already have to face is that the bishop's campaign is flagging. As his plane, called the Free Enterprise, puts down at another strip, the passengers know that their whistle-stop tour is turning out to be an airborne flop. Like a string of other destinations, Melceta football ground was supposed to be the scene of a Muzorewa rally. But though the party started on time, the guests were very few. Only about 50 supporters turned up instead of the expected 500. With his campaign hat telling its own sad story, the disappointed bishop was plainly reluctant to even get out of his Land Rover. In fact, he waited for nearly an hour while more supporters trickled in. To many, it's confirmation that the bishop faces an uphill battle in this campaign, that many Africans were suspicious of his internal settlement with Ian Smith, and that many more were disappointed by the slow pace of change in his 6 months in power. With the crowd at around 100, the bishop does his best. He describes his opponents as thugs and murderers, men who have to rely on terrorism to get what they cannot win by democratic means. Afterwards, he claims that teams of young terrorists called Mujibas are systematically trying to wreck his election campaign.
Every meeting I've been since I left Salisbury on Friday, addressing at least 4 meetings a day. Every meeting I go to, we find that there have been mujibas or tears going on before I come house to house, telling them not to come to the meeting or else they will be killed. Every meeting. And so this has made our campaigning very difficult.
The people are actually afraid, you think, to turn out for you, to show their support for you?
That is correct. That is correct. In fact, those who have dared to come must be very bold because they are threatened to their lives if they go to these meetings.
But in this African election, intimidation is a game that everyone denounces, but everyone still plays. Deep in a tribal trust land, a unit of Bishop Muzorewa's auxiliaries starts a combat patrol. Described by some as the bishop's private army, they're known officially as the Spear of the People, and they're attached to the Rhodesian security forces under White Command. The operation they're about to conduct was not authorised by the Governor, Lord Soames, and is clearly outside the terms of the Lancaster House Agreement. But with no monitoring force observers within 20 miles, the Spears of the People can effectively ignore the ceasefire. Leading this operation, a British-born mercenary who helped us film without the knowledge of his Rhodesian commanders. Since the ceasefire, the 30,000 auxiliaries in Rhodesia have been under orders to show the flag in the African villages. The target today is a hostile area known to have sheltered Zanla terrorists. The objective? To try and root out those guerrillas who have stayed behind in defiance of the Lancaster House Agreement. The soldiers discover tracks left by guerrillas, or as the soldiers call them, gooks. While the men take up combat positions, the unit leaders try to get information from a villager.
Why is he afraid? Look, Maxwell, tell him we know he has collaborator activity in this area, especially in this kraal. So if he's got something to say, let him say it. Otherwise, we're not going to come back and help him if the tourists show up.
The villagers say nothing, but as the troops leave, they round up 2 more people who immediately become suspects. They're men of military age, dressed in civilian clothes, with identity papers that don't quite match their stories. Within minutes, the Muzorewa soldiers are convinced that they've caught a couple of terrorists in disguise. Even in a ceasefire, it doesn't take much to get arrested in the Rhodesian bush.
They know before they know their own father, don't.
Apparently, the 2 men later confessed to being terrorists. Under the ceasefire, they should have been sent to an assembly point. Instead, after we left, one was sent for interrogation, the other was shot while trying to escape. Like most of Bishop Muzorewa's auxiliaries, the unit we filmed is based in an African village, a village where they get a hero's welcome at the end of the patrol. There are more than 30,000 of these men based in villages up and down the country. The bishop's supporters hope that their physical control will help to deliver the votes. In many areas, the bishop is going to need every vote he can get. For if one fact has emerged clearly in this campaign, it's that his main opponent, Robert Mugabe, is riding a tidal wave of support. It's support above all from the younger Africans who have identified with the struggle against white rule and see Mugabe as its most potent symbol. For many, the simple fact that the whites hate him above all other black leaders makes him a kind of messiah. The rally, which welcomed the ZANU leader back to Salisbury, literally changed the face of the election. Until this day, Mugabe had been the most anonymous of the nationalist leaders. No one really certain how much support he commanded. As it turned out, his rally was the biggest that Salisbury had ever seen.
I felt extremely delighted, overwhelmed by the whole event. It was really fantastic. I hadn't expected it. I knew our people supported us. I knew they supported the struggle, but I didn't appreciate the extent to which they would go in welcoming me back. It was really fantastic. Before the elections, now that we have achieved peace, I think we must remove this pressure of the war upon the people and ensure that the people will be free to exercise their vote and that they will do it really voluntarily without any pressures being exerted on them.
But out in the villages where Mugabe's movement is still based, the claim that he is willing to relax the political control that his soldiers have imposed rings a little false. Ostensibly, this is one of the ZANU PF candidates addressing an election rally. In fact, he knows that he can already count on every single vote, because this village has long been a base for Mugabe's terrorist war. These people have lived with Zanla guerrillas around them and among them, and not surprisingly, their view of Bishop Muzorewa is harsh.
Muzorewa, of course, yes, we voted for him, but what happened? After that, there is no change. There was no change until today.
What, the people here in this village actually voted for Bishop Muzorewa last time, did they?
Of course, yes. By gunpoint.
What did you hope, though, that Bishop Muzorewa would do for you people here? When you voted for him, what did you hope would happen?
When Muzorewa was the Prime Minister, all this 6 months' time, Muzorewa, we see so many bloodshed under Muzorewa's government. So that's what we don't want. We want a free government. We don't want bloodshed in our country.
So what you're saying is that you want the war to end?
Yes.
The fighting to stop?
Yes.
But there are a lot of people in this country who still believe that Bishop Muzorewa can win the elections. Do you think he can?
Never.
What happens if he does? What happens if somehow he does win?
War goes on.
Why is that? Why are you so bitter against the bishop now?
No. He has cheated us. He has cheated us enough. Now we want to play the other side of the record now.
While the older villagers spoke to us, the younger men held back. Several of them, we were told privately, were Zanla guerrillas, who in violation of the Lancaster House Agreement have not reported to their assembly points. Instead, they've received orders to hide their weapons and remain among the population to make sure that all goes well. At the end of the meeting, they drifted off into the bush. Father Stephen Matewa is the village priest. In the last 3 years, he, like the other villagers, has had to make his own accommodation with the Zanla guerrillas. The only way was to help them.
If I reveal the truth, I have taken in 2 guerrillas, shot seriously into hospitals. Of course, I had to tell lies that they were my sons. You know, my wife is a nurse. We have treated people. We have stolen, I think this is correct, we have stolen medicines which we claim, which we said we wanted to keep the people who are suffering around here, people whom we keep here, the children I keep here, to give to the guerrillas.
But you know that the Salisbury regime has always said, whoever was in power in Salisbury, that the guerrillas, the freedom fighters as you call them, are in fact terrorists who keep their hold over the people here through fear.
That is what they say, but that is not quite true here. Yes, you see, when you have a gun, there is a bit of fear behind it. Like a father, when you have your son obeying you or respecting you, there is a bit of fear behind it. So with these young men, because they had guns, there was a little bit of fear. But this fear is not reflected by people. They should be hating them, but they still like them because the cause for which they are fighting is a genuine cause. The method may be wrong, but the cause is perfectly legitimate.
So you're really saying that the majority of the people in this area are involved in the ZANU struggle, if you like?
All of them, without exception.
Without exception?
Without exception. Anybody who is an exception is not living here.
Could he live here if he wanted to, or would it be impossible?
It would be impossible, because he would be forced. This is what you would call intimidation.
The guerrilla soldier, by his very nature, is forced at times to exert pressure upon the civilian population, isn't he? Because he himself
there are bound to be instances, but this instances where certain pressures are exerted so that there is conformity, so that actually the enemy does not take advantage of the situation. It's a war, you see, when it's being fought. And certain rules must be applied. If the enemy is attacking a certain area, and it's necessary that the population be pressurized into taking a defensive position, well, it's in their interest, and you have just to do that. But this was not the rule. It was more the exception than the rule.
Do you accept responsibility yourself? Does your party accept responsibility for any incident involving intimidation, any incident involving fear among the population?
We have not had any incident whatsoever reported to us concerning intimidation. There may be 1 or 2 incidents relating to contact with the security forces, but in those circumstances, the security forces should not have been deployed at all. It's contrary to the agreement that they are just now on deployment. And our people naturally get worried that they are being encircled by the forces, and they have a right to defend themselves and a right to defend the masses too in those circumstances.
Assembly Point Echo lies in a remote valley near the Mozambique border. It's a place deliberately chosen, it seems, to keep the guerrillas as far from the population as possible. On the ground, a political commissar called Comrade Boaz, who, according to some editions, ordered the attack on the Muzorewa bus. When we filmed just before the bus attack, he had about 1,000 men under his command. Since then, the Rhodesians claim, groups of these guerrillas have left the assembly point to commit terrorist acts among the population. Comrade Boaz, however, rejected all suggestions that his men would do anything unlawful to try and influence the election.
We came from the people, and we fight for the people. We are their sons and daughters in the bush. Those who are going to vote are our fathers and mothers, sisters and brothers. So I think we will win.
But already, when we were there, it was clear that Echo was a ceasefire flashpoint. Every day, while the Zanla guerrillas train and drill, they hear of new operations carried out by the Muzorewa auxiliaries. The reports anger them, and their stay at the assembly point has done nothing to make them forget the purpose of their struggle. What experiences have you had in the struggle yourself?
It's a bitter experience. It's quite bitter. Because the time I left home, I left the village burning. I don't know at present whether my parents are existing or are dead. This is, you can see the bitterness in me and the desire for revenge.
What kind of revenge do you mean, though, Comrade Boaz?
The revenge I mean is to overthrow the enemy, the Smith regime, and all those, he took to be his shields.
Who did he take to be his shield?
Muzorewa.
When Lord Carrington decided to try and hold an election in a land full of armed men, he was taking a brave gamble. As an attempt to let the people decide their fate without reference to the bully boys with guns, it was perhaps unique in history. But with 3 weeks to go, the realities of this African war are closing in. And the question is whether the British government has the power or the inclination to do anything effective about them. Perhaps it was not entirely coincidence that when we asked for an interview with the governor, Lord Soames, he replied that he was too busy to see us.